Story 1. The Silent Stalker of Hollingsworth Manor. Hollingsworth Manor was an imposing Victorian mansion perched on a hill in the remote English countryside, its age-old stone walls enshrouded by thick ivy. The manor, while once a symbol of wealth and prestige, had become the subject of eerie rumors over the years. Locals whispered about the house's history, about the previous occupants who had mysteriously vanished, and the strange occurrences that seemed to haunt the property. But it wasn't until Sarah and Tom, a young couple seeking to escape the bustle of city life, moved into the manor in 1920, that the terrifying truth of Hollingsworth Manor would be revealed. Sarah and Tom had always been drawn to history, and the manor's grand yet decaying beauty fascinated them. They had heard the rumors, of course, but they were skeptical of such stories. They figured it was just old folktales passed down through the ages, nothing more than superstition. However, within weeks of moving in, their doubts began to waver, as inexplicable occurrences began to unfold. At first, the events were minor. A light flickered here and there, an odd draft swept through the halls, and the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick erratically, even when the hands had long since stopped moving. But over time, the occurrences became impossible to ignore. Sarah would often hear the distinct sound of footsteps trailing behind her as she walked down the hallway. But when she turned, the corridor was empty. Objects would shift on their own, and doors would open with no one there to open them. One particularly cold evening, Sarah was alone in the library, reading by the fire. The stillness of the house was broken only by the crackling of the flames, when she suddenly heard soft, deliberate footsteps from behind her. She whipped around, expecting to see Tom, but no one was there. The air in the room grew colder, and she felt a sudden heaviness settle over her chest. She looked back at the book she had been reading, and there, scrawled across the open pages, were strange, cryptic symbols that she hadn't written. Panic set in, and she bolted from the library, but the unease lingered. The situation escalated, when Sarah began to feel a growing presence, something watching her lurking just out of sight. Late one night, as she walked through the long corridor outside their bedroom, she caught a glimpse of something in the long mirror hanging in the hallway. A dark figure stood behind her. It was a tall, shadowy figure with hollow eyes, staring directly at her. Sarah spun around, but the hallway was empty. Terrified, she rushed back to the safety of her room and locked the door behind her. In the days that followed, the supernatural disturbances became more violent. The couple discovered a hidden journal belonging to the manor's previous owner, Lady Eleanor, who had written about her experiences with the very same spirit that now tormented Sarah and Tom. The entity was a restless spirit, a malevolent force, that had been trapped in the manor after an ancient ritual gone wrong. It fed on fear and sorrow, growing stronger with each passing day. The couple tried to leave, but the spirit refused to let them go. The final straw came one evening when Sarah found Tom, lifeless, his eyes wide open, his mouth frozen in a scream of terror. His body had been dragged from their bed, his soul seemingly torn from his body in some unseen, horrible manner. Terrified beyond measure, Sarah fled the manor, never to return. To this day, the mansion remains abandoned, standing as a silent testament to the horrors that occurred within its walls. Those who dare to approach the manor report hearing strange whispers on the wind and feeling a cold, oppressive presence looming over them. Some claim they have seen the shadowy figure in the window, the ghost of the entity that still haunts the grounds. Story 2. The Poltergeist of the Harrow Family. Home. The Harrow family moved into an old farmhouse just outside of Massachusetts in the early 1970s, eager for a fresh start. The farmhouse had been vacant for years, and though it was in a state of disrepair, the family saw it as the perfect home for their growing children. What they didn't know was that the farmhouse had a long history, and not all of it was pleasant. In the beginning, the family experienced little more than creaking floorboards and the occasional bump in the night. But soon, the activity grew, more intense. The first sign that something was amiss was when the youngest child, little Katie, began speaking about her new imaginary friend. At first, the Harrows thought nothing of it. Every child has an imaginary friend, after all. But Katie's stories became more detailed. She described the figure as a tall man with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. She claimed he would visit her at night and talk to her in a low, rasping voice. Katie seemed terrified of this friend, but whenever her parents tried to investigate, they found nothing. The strange happening soon escalated. The Harrows would wake to find their kitchen chairs stacked neatly on the table, though no one had touched them the night before. Mugs and plates would fly off the shelves, crashing to the floor as if thrown by an invisible hand. The family's dog would bark incessantly at empty corners, its hackles raised in fear, though no one could see what it was reacting to. Objects would move on their own, books shifting on shelves, doors creaking open and slamming shut with violent force. The air in the house grew thick and oppressive, as though something dark and malevolent was lurking just out of sight. As the disturbances grew more aggressive, the family reached out to a local paranormal investigator. The investigator arrived with his equipment and quickly sensed something wrong. During a seance, he made contact with the spirit that had been haunting the Harrow family. The spirit revealed that it was the vengeful ghost of a man who had been wronged by the original owners of the house. The spirit's rage was so great that it had become a poltergeist, capable of physically manipulating objects and terrorizing the living. The investigator performed an exorcism to drive the spirit from the house, but the damage had already been done. The Harrows were forced to leave, unable to live in the house any longer. They never returned, and the farmhouse was eventually abandoned. Those brave enough to visit report hearing the eerie sounds of footsteps in the night, the sound of objects being thrown across the room, and a low whispering voice that seems to come from the walls. Story 3. The girl in the mirror. Megan had always been skeptical of supernatural stories. She prided herself on being practical and logical, dismissing any talk of ghosts and spirits as figments of the imagination. But that all changed in 2003 when she moved into an old apartment in the heart of a bustling city. The apartment was charming in its own way, with hardwood floors, vintage furniture, and an antique mirror that hung above the fireplace. At first, Megan felt completely at ease in her new home, but as the days went on, she began to notice something unsettling about the mirror. It wasn't just the way it reflected the room, it was the way it felt. Every time Megan passed by it, she would feel a strange chill in the air, as though the mirror was watching her. Sometimes, she would catch glimpses of movement in the reflection out of the corner of her eye, but when she looked, there was nothing there. One evening, as Megan was getting ready for bed, she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair. That was when she saw it. A figure, pale, with long, dark hair, stood behind her in the reflection. Megan whipped around, but there was no one there. Her heart pounded in her chest as she turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there, staring at her with hollow eyes, a twisted, unsettling grin on its face. Terrified, Megan backed away from the mirror, but the figure remained. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It just grinned at her, as if it were waiting for something. That night, Megan slept with the lights on, but the image of the grinning figure stayed with her. The next few days were a blur of dread and confusion. The figure in the mirror continued to appear, each time closer to her. Megan's reflection began to shift. She would see her own face distort, twisted into an unnatural smile, as though someone or something was controlling her movements. Finally, after days of sleepless nights and growing terror, Megan called a psychic for help. The psychic immediately sensed a dark energy around the mirror. She explained that the spirit of a young girl had been trapped inside the glass, her soul bound by a curse. The girl had died under mysterious circumstances many years ago, and her spirit had been left to wander the mirror, seeking a way out. With the psychic's guidance, Megan performed a ritual to release the trapped spirit. As she completed the final step, the figure in the mirror vanished, and the air in the apartment seemed to lift. Megan never saw the girl again, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror had once been a doorway to something far darker. The mirror was taken away, and Megan moved out shortly after, too afraid to stay. To this day, Megan avoids mirrors at night, fearful of what might stare back at her from the other side. These true nightmarish encounters with the supernatural remind us that the unknown is never truly far away. Whether it's a malevolent spirit feeding on fear, a poltergeist wreaking havoc, or a restless soul trapped in a mirror, the supernatural lingers, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to cross its path. Are you brave enough to face it? Or will you, like so many others, be left with more questions than answers?